This is the last of the foundational documents that you had to read in unit number one, and this is Federalist 51. This is another one of the Federalist papers. This one is also written by James Madison. So, again, this is an argument as to like why the Constitution is going to be a good thing. So this includes one of our famous quotes from U.S. government. You're likely to see this quote again. Madison wrote in Federalist 51, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary." So basically, what that means is that if people were perfect, you wouldn't need a government to keep them in line. So the first purpose of a government, a good government, is to be able to control its citizens. Then there's the second part. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls of government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place oblige it to control itself. So, in Madison's opinion, the first part is, again, the government has to be able to control its citizens. But the second part is that a good government has to be able to control itself. And that's really what this whole essay is about. Federalist 51 talks about how this government is designed to control against the abuse of power, which is something the anti-federalists are really worried about. So the first thing that Madison writes about in Federalist 51 about why readers are not going to be able to abuse power in like this new constitutional model of government is because great trouble went into separating power between the three branches. One person or group is not responsible for all aspects of governing. In our system of government, the legislative branch is responsible for passing the laws. The executive branch is responsible for enforcing the laws, and the judicial branch is responsible for settling disputes that arise dealing with the laws. So you are cutting up power between three separate groups. Again, that reduces the likelihood that power will be abused. The other thing is you essentially are giving like sort of weapons to each branch to prevent the other one from abusing power. So yeah, like Congress passes laws, but presidents can veto them. Right? Congress can impeach and convict a president. The Supreme Court can declare laws passed by Congress or actions of the president unconstitutional. So each has the ability to stop the other one from abusing its power. So he writes a lot about how power is separated and how each of the branches can check and balance what the other ones are doing. He goes even further and says, not only are we dividing up power between the branches, but they went to great lengths to even divide power up within branches. So, for example, the legislative branch, which all the founding fathers looked at as potentially the most dangerous and probably the one that would be most willing to abuse power, they divided power up between two different houses, like the House and the Senate. They don't do the same thing, and each does have the ability to check each other. So not only are there separation of powers and checks and balances between the branches, but there are separation of powers and checks and balances within branches like the legislative branch. And then the last thing he writes about is something that he refers to as a compound republic. And again, his argument is not only are you dividing power between the branches, but you're also dividing power between like levels of government. This is what we refer to as like federalism. This is what he refers to as a compound republic. You have some power be given to the national government, separated between three branches within the national government: legislative, judicial, and executive. But then you also have some of that power being given to state governments, again, separated between the legislative branch and the state governments, the executive branch and state governments, and then the judicial branch and state governments. And his argument is, again, the more that you divide power out, whether it's between branches or now between like the levels of government, national and state, the less likely that you'll ever have anybody be able to like actually abuse power. So again, Federalist 51 is really about like the major features of our government: separation of powers, checks and balances, and federalism. And this is the argument to the anti-federalists about how power will not be as abused as easily in the new constitutional model as it was like under like the British system of government.